Alright, so I've kind of ditched the idea of making range ammo for myself for now, just due to the sheer volume of rounds I need, or at least until I get a better setup for making rounds or get a powder thrower attached to my desk. Preferably an option that doesn't involve me drilling yet more holes into my desk, but I do still need some defensive ammo, and specifically I need defensive ammo for a concealed carry gun. I did purchase a holster for my CZ P09 compact Nocturne pistol. I don't have it yet, but if I'm being honest with myself, I probably need to lose another 15 to 20 pounds before I can get away with carrying this thing. So I need good defensive rounds for a subcompact gun. Here are the subcompact guns I have. I have the SIG 365 and the Kimber Micro 9. I'm not sure if these are considered micro or subcompact, but whatever, no one cares at this point. Now the problem with subcompact guns is they're very snappy and kind of suck to shoot. This leads to the subject of the video. I'll get into why I think these will work really well with subcompact guns later. So a while ago, I bought some RMR 124 grain jacketed hollow points, the newer RMR Nuke versions. They're pretty cheap as far as hollow points go, and they're a good looking round. They expanded to these weird triangle shapes, which is kind of interesting. The problem with these though is there's not going to be a lot of good load data out there for them, which is how it's going to be for any sort of smaller bullet maker. The Western Powder manual does have it listed for accurate number 5, but that manual is the 8.0 version from 2020. And as far as I can tell, that's probably also the old version of the hollow points, as they were revised and designed sometime recently. I don't know the exact year, but looking on the product page, the reviews start in 2022, so we'll go with that. I'm guessing there's not going to be a ton of difference between them, but we'll have to do a little research on this. Now, normally for defensive ammo, I'd be looking for really high velocities. So in general, I'd want to look at the slower burning powders for maximum speed. Looking at the powder burn rate chart, I don't have much experience with most of these powders on the chart here, but in general, there isn't a ton of load data for anything slower than accurate number 7, at least for regular pressure rounds. So in theory, that's probably going to be one of my better bets for highest velocity rounds. There are a couple problems with that though. It's an extremely fine powder and tends to get everywhere, and I kind of worry it won't really work out all that well with the powder throwers, since if I'm going to be reloading 9mm or any semi-auto round, I'm going to have to start using a powder thrower. And when I say by won't work, I mean I think static might end up being an issue with it, because it's just like dust. The other thing I wanted to look into was having a powder I could use in both 45 ACP and 9mm. So once I do try out a powder thrower, I don't have to worry as much about cross-contamination when I empty it, or at least don't have to worry about cleaning it out all that well. Now again, the Western Powder Manual does list accurate number 5, which sits right here on the burn rate chart. Previously, my problem with accurate number 5 is I'm not sure if I'm going to get enough oomph out of it to get the velocity I'm looking for when it comes to defensive rounds without going into like plus P territory, which that makes shooting subcompacts even worse. Most factory defensive ammo, Federal HST, Nosler ASP, ETC, they all seem to go with 1150 feet per second out of a 4-inch barrel for their regular pressure rounds. And I don't see much of a chance of accurate number 5 getting to that speed unless we go into plus P territory. But that's where the RMR bullets come in. Reading the description, they did gel testing and got 16 to 17 inches of penetration with good expansion when shooting at 1,000 feet per second, and 14 inches of penetration at 1,100 feet per second with expansion of around 0.63 inches. That's pretty solid for the lower end of 9mm velocity, so I think this would be a great bullet for subcompact guns. Most of them have a 3-inch barrel. Less barrel means less velocity, so with that testing, the Western Powder Manual says they got 1,070 feet per second out of a 4-inch barrel with accurate number 5. So I'm going to see if I can get something similar to that. And if not, I'll end up just falling back on accurate number 7 or another powder. CFE pistol seems like it could be a decent velocity powder for this, but man, my 1911 got really dirty after using it. It cleaned up just fine, and I think it's one of those powders where you just need higher pressure rounds like 9mm, but since I do want to protect my hearing, I'm probably going to end up getting a 9mm suppressor, and I'm going to want something that burns relatively cleanly if I want to go with that. So I want to test out accurate number 5 and try it in 2 guns. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a gun with a 4-inch barrel. The closest thing I have is my CZ, which has a 4.5-inch barrel. So my velocities are going to be a little bit higher, but if they got like 1,070 feet per second, I maybe should be getting, I don't know, another 20 feet per second out of the extra half-inch. It's hard to say. I'll try it out with my CZ and I can compare velocities, but the whole point of doing this ammo was for a subcompact gun. So I'll try the top end load in my SIG 365 as well, aiming at just anything above 1,000 feet per second. Now, the first hurdle I'm seeing I might run into is going to be cartridge overall length. The only published one we have out there is the Western Powder Manual with an overall length of 1.120 inches. This is the same overall length recommended by both Nosler and Spear 124 grain hollow points. I'm probably fine sticking with that overall length, even though it might be the older version of the bullet, but seating depth can have a big effect on pressure, especially with pistol powders. Hornady XTPs list a overall length of 1.06 inches, and Sierra says to go with 1.1 inches for their V crowns. So with that in mind, we'll go with an overall length of 1.120 inches, but looking at the RMR forums and some of the reviews, there are a few newer posts talking about engaging the rifling on their guns. Some people are loading at shorter overall length with CZ guns. CZ is a European manufacturer, and in general they have slightly different specs, so they have like slightly shorter chambers sometimes. So before I actually load anything, we're going to make a dummy round just to make sure we're not engaging the rifling at 1.120 inches. In the forums, they seem to be going anywhere from an overall length of 1.06 inches to 1.1 inches. But that's just a bunch of dudes on a forum, and you should never trust people on the internet, like me. Now, real quick, the 124 grain jacketed hollow points are 0.546 inches long. So how does that compare to other hollow points? Well, looking at XTPs, they're anywhere between 0.571 to 0.576 inches long. I had a hard time finding any information listed by Hornady, but either way, theirs are significantly longer. Nosler kindly lists the bullet length on their product page. 124 grain ones are listed at 0.560 inches long. And lastly, the Sierra V crowns, or SIG V crowns, I guess, are 0.585 inches long per the SIG website. The thing is, I kind of take these with a grain of salt because anytime I've ever measured one of these against what the manufacturer says, they tend to be different. So, but either way, they're all significantly longer than the RMR nukes. That would lead me to believe a seating depth of 1.120 inches would be more likely to cause less pressure, but we'll see. It of course depends on bullet construction, and if we pass the plunk test in the first place. But given that the bullet is significantly shorter, I think we could seat shorter if we needed to. So first comes resizing, screw it in until it touches. Next, expansion, screw it in until it touches, and back out one full turn. 1, 2. And now we seat the bullet. Screw it in. Back it out 3 full turns. 3.5 so I can see the seating stem. I prepped all these beforehand, before I knew what a huge task this is going to be. All right, confirm there's no primer in there, and get seating. All right, so we are at an overall length of 1.165. And because I can't do math and I had to pull the bullet a little bit, 1.120. But luckily, when I used the inertial bullet puller, one tap got me exactly where I needed it to be. So that's pretty great, actually. And this seems a little long for a bullet, but we'll check it out. I want to quick compare it to a factory hollow point. 1.06 inches for the Norma Safeguard, 124 grain. So first the factory round. Lines up flush, or just barely just barely below flush with the ledge there. Spins freely. And just kind of interested, the still belled out round, does that pass the okay, so that does not pass the crimp test, but it is still belled out. So I want to see where it goes from there. So now I'm not gonna crimp this one. I'm gonna try just running it through the factory crimp die that came with my 9mm set, just to see if the carbide sizing ring will iron it out. Still doesn't work. Okay. Let's try crimping it a little bit, I guess. So, okay, so half turn for a light crimp. And does that fact pass the plunk test now? Still no. Okay, it is caught on that. So we are going to have to seat these deeper. Will it fit in my SIG 365 though? Ah, my SIG is filthy. My dummy round? And it turns freely. So I need to seat this deeper. Now, unfortunately, I already crimped this. Let's see if it will let me just seat it deeper, because the crimp I put on it was a pretty light crimp. So let's try 1.10 inches first and see if that works. All right, 0.110 inches. See if that goes. Closer, but still not where we need to be. 1.088 inches. Getting close, but still not there. Still engaging the rifling. 1.079. So 1.08 basically. Getting closer. 1.07. Okay, so it's pretty, it feels pretty close to where I need to be. If I lift it up just barely, it will spin free. So I think we need to go down another 10 just to be safe. 1.056, so I went a little bit farther down than I meant to. Okay, rotates freely, goes in. So I pushed it in slightly more than I wanted to. Let me get the impact bullet puller, because I want to dial this in. My desk is just a mess now. 1.07. Okay. 1.060 inches. Okay. Okay, pressing down on it, it rotates freely. 1.060, I think, is the minimum length is the maximum length we can go if I want to also fit this in the CZ barrels. Let me try one more tap out with the bullet puller just to confirm that. 1.071. Okay. Oh, and that does not rotate. So if I lower it down 5, 1.066. Rotates freely at 1.066. So yeah, 1.07 is basically the cutoff for that. So to make sure we're safe and we're not close to engaging the rifling, we're going to go 1.06 inches long. So yeah, let me clean up this mess and get that factory round out of here. So now we have our seating depth. Next would be the ladder. So our first resource is obviously going to be the Western Powder Manual, which gives us a range of 5.5 to 6.1 grain. Now, Hornady doesn't give us anything with accurate number 5, but Nosler does give a range of 4.4 to 5.4, which is unfortunately quite a bit lower. Both Sierra and Spear give a range of 5.6 to 6.5 grains, which is more in line with the Western Powder Manual. And then lastly, the Lyman Manual gives a range of 5.4 to 6.1 using 124 grain XTPs, which is basically the exact same range listed in the Western Powder Manual. And then Lyman also seats their XTPs at the same depth of 1.06 inches. So then looking at the load data, Nosler seems to be the outlier, so we'll stick with the Western Powder Manual / Lyman Manual range. We'll start off at 5.5 grains and go up in 0.2 grain increments, so 5.5, 5.7, 5.9, 6.1 grains, and then see what that gets us velocity-wise. That's all at regular pressure. The seating depth thing does worry me a little bit, but with the Western Powder Manual, it does list plus P data for their RMR jacketed hollow points from 6.1 to 6.5 grains, which is more in line with regular pressure data from the other manufacturers. But because we're playing with the seating depth, I want to kind of stay away from plus P just because at that point it's probably better just to choose a different powder. At 6.5 grains, they got a velocity of 1,139 feet per second. So if I'm flirting with 1,140 feet per second out of my CZ with the slightly longer barrel, I'm going to just go ahead and stop because that means I'm already starting to get into plus P territory potentially. So these are already primed and expanded. I just need powder, bullet, and then crimp. And then I'm going to load up 5 sets of 5, the ladder of 4, and then at the highest charge of 6.1 grains, I'm going to do 2 of those, one through my CZ and one through my SIG 365. All right, so got these all loaded up. There was one that I left kind of upside down like that because when I measured it, I got a case length or overall length of 1.067, and that was kind of like the borderline where it was starting to engage the rifling when I was testing it before. Most of them were all within 1.059 to 1.063, and those were all fine. That one that was 1.067, that one, when I did a plunk test with it, it did engage the rifling a little bit, or at least it didn't spin as freely as I wanted it to. I just lowered it another like 0.003, redid it, and then it passed the plunk test just fine. So I think just because of the kind of sloppiness of the Lee press, and also just because hollow point tips aren't all exactly, even. I would probably want to back down the overall length to 1.0, like 1.055, just to make sure that we're not going to ever have any of that issues, even with kind of the sloppier play of the lead press. So yeah, next is shooting. Actually, real quick, do the shake test. Okay, I do hear a very small amount of powder movement in there, so I'm not compressing any of these or anything, and that's the max load. So, all right, to the range. So I'm back from the range, and seating depth apparently does make quite a bit of difference here. At our lowest charge of 5.5 grains, we got an average velocity of 1,086 feet per second. So that's already above the normal presser max velocity of the Western Powder Manual listed at 1,070 feet per second. So I figure 5.5 grains is fine here, since I'm shooting out of a barrel that's like about a half inch longer, so an extra 20 or so feet per second kind of makes sense. Also, looking at other reloading data sources like the Spear Manual and Sierra, they max out with accurate number 5 at between 1,070 feet per second and 1,100 feet per second at regular pressure velocities. So that kind of tells me 5.5 grains is still in the safe range here. But that also tells me I'm pretty much right at normal max pressure right at our starting charge. So I guess seating a bullet 0.06 inches deeper in a case does make a pretty significant difference. I ended up changing things up a bit, so if the 5.5 grains was about at normal pressure max, going up to 5.7 grains would kind of maybe be at the start of plus P territory and still should be okay to shoot. So I ended up shooting that 5.7 grain charge out of my SIG 365 and got an average velocity of 1,031 feet per second with a spread of only 31, which isn't too bad for a pistol round. So I think shooting a charge of 5.5 grains out of my SIG would probably get me around 1,000 feet per second, and that's kind of what I'm looking for in the first place. I might have to bump it up to like 5.6 grains just to make sure I get above the 1,000 feet per second threshold, but I can check that later. So based on this info, accurate number 5 will work for me, especially if I'm looking to make like slightly lower velocity range ammo, but it might not be ideal for defensive ammo. Doing this has also told me I really need to do the plunk test with hollow points on my CZ just to make sure it's safe to load at whatever the book overall length is. I felt okay shooting the 5.9 grain load out of my CZ and got an average of 1,050 feet per second. But again, this is kind of right above the max plus P load the Western Powder Manual lists, which is 1,140 feet per second. With me shooting the slightly longer barrel, I think I'm pretty much right near the max plus P load at 5.9 grains. I'm going to end up pulling the 6.1 grain loads. While they're probably safe to shoot, it might be closer to like plus P plus territory, and I'm not really going to bother with that. 1,000 feet per second was what I was looking for anyway, so I'm just going to stick with what I got. So if I want to make some defensive ammo using accurate number 5 that function in all my guns, I'm going to have to stick with 5.5 grains and seat everything at 1.06 inches long, or maybe just barely shorter than that, like 1.058 inches, just to make sure I'm safe in the CZ. In the future, I'll have to verify this with my SIG 365 at 5.5 grains to see if it gets me at 1,000 feet per second, or if I'm looking to need to bump it up to like 5.6 grains or something like that, which would still, I think, be in a safe range for this powder. Otherwise, once I get a powder thrower, I can try out making up some range ammo. The Western Powder Manual lists Barry's bullets, so I should be able to follow that book data exactly. Anyway, thanks for watching.